What if the most powerful force shaping modern America was not a government, not a political movement, but a single family whose name became synonymous with wealth itself? Most people know the Rockefellers were rich. They built grand estates, gave to charity, and sat atop the oil industry. That is the story taught in textbooks, but it misses something fundamental. In 1913, John D. Rockefeller's personal fortune was estimated at $900 million. Adjusted for the economy's size, that would be worth over $400 billion today. He was not merely wealthy. He controlled roughly 2% of the entire United States economy in his own hands. No single American, before or since, has held that concentration of economic power. But here is what most people do not understand. The Rockefeller influence did not end when Standard Oil was broken up. It did not diminish when John D. Sr. died in 1937. The family built something more durable than a company. They built institutions. They shaped how Americans think about medicine, education, energy, and global affairs. The universities you attend, the medical treatments you receive, the foreign policy your government pursues, all carry fingerprints from decisions made in Rockefeller boardrooms a century ago. This is not a story about conspiracy. This is a story about architecture, about how one family, starting with a single refinery in Cleveland, constructed an institutional framework that would outlast any company, any fortune, any individual lifetime. Let me show you how they did it, and why the pattern still operates today. John Davison Rockefeller was born on July 8, 1839, in Richford, New York. His father, William Avery Rockefeller, was a traveling salesman of dubious character who abandoned the family for long stretches and maintained a secret second family. His mother, Eliza, was a devout Baptist who instilled in young John a rigid discipline and religious conviction that would define his life. From his earliest years, Rockefeller displayed an unusual relationship with money. He kept a small ledger, recording every penny earned and every cent donated to charity. By age 16, he had secured his first job as an assistant bookkeeper in Cleveland, earning $3.57 per week. He would later describe the day he got that job, September 26, 1855, as the most important day of his life. The world Rockefeller entered was one of explosive opportunity and brutal competition. The American Civil War had just ended when Edwin Drake struck oil in Titusville, Pennsylvania in 1859. The discovery unleashed chaos. Thousands rushed to the oil regions. Prices swung wildly. In 1861, crude sold for $10 a barrel. By 1862, overproduction had crashed the price to 10 cents. Fortunes were made and lost in months. Most people saw disorder. Rockefeller saw opportunity. Not in drilling for oil, that was gambling. The real money, he recognized, was in refining. Taking crude petroleum and turning it into kerosene for America's lamps. That was a process. That could be systematized. That could be controlled. In 1863, with partners Maurice Clark and Samuel Andrews, Rockefeller built his first refinery in Cleveland. By 1865, it was the largest in the city. In 1870, he incorporated Standard Oil of Ohio with $1 million in capital. The company's name was a statement of intent. Standard, uniform, consistent. In an industry defined by chaos, Rockefeller would impose order. Think about what Cleveland meant in practical terms. The city sat at the intersection of two major railroad lines and had access to waterways connecting to the eastern seaboard. Geography made it a natural refining center. Rockefeller understood this better than anyone. He negotiated secret rebates with the railroads, not just discounts on his own shipping, but payments from the railroads for every barrel his competitors shipped. The more oil his rivals moved, the more money Rockefeller made. The official story of Standard Oil's dominance focuses on efficiency. Rockefeller's refineries were indeed more efficient. He invested in the newest equipment, employed chemists to extract more kerosene per barrel, and manufactured his own barrels to cut costs. All true. But efficiency alone does not explain how one company came to control 90% of American oil refining by 1880. That required something else. In February 1872, the South Improvement Company scheme came to light. Standard Oil and a handful of allied refiners had secretly negotiated with the Pennsylvania Railroad, the New York Central, and the Erie Railroad. The deal would double shipping rates for oil, but Standard Oil and its allies would receive full rebates plus additional payments called drawbacks on their competitors' shipments. The plan would have made competition mathematically impossible. When independent refiners discovered the scheme, they were furious. Public outcry killed the South Improvement Company before it could begin operations, but the damage was done. Rockefeller had revealed his hand. In the months following the scandal, he launched what he called the Cleveland Massacre. One by one, he approached Cleveland's 26 independent refineries with the same message: join Standard Oil or face destruction. Within 3 months, 22 had sold. Most received Standard Oil stock rather than cash. Many later became wealthy beyond their imaginations as Standard's shares multiplied. The pattern was unmistakable. Rockefeller did not simply outcompete rivals, he absorbed them, forced them to choose between joining his system or being crushed by it. And those who joined found their fortunes tied to Standard's success. By 1879, Standard Oil had consolidated its control through a new legal mechanism, the trust. Rockefeller and his associates transferred their stock in 40 different companies to 9 trustees, who managed them as a single entity. This was not illegal. No law addressed such arrangements. It was a legal innovation that created unity while maintaining the appearance of separation. From the outside, Standard Oil looked like dozens of independent companies. From the inside, it was one machine with one purpose. The scale of Standard Oil's dominance is difficult to comprehend today. By 1880, the company refined 90 to 95% of all oil in the United States. It owned 90% of the nation's pipelines. It controlled the prices at which producers could sell, the rates at which railroads shipped, and the margins at which retailers operated. Farmers who needed kerosene for their lamps had one choice. Standard Oil's price was the price. But here is the key question. How did one company maintain this dominance for decades? The answer lies not in oil barrels, but in information. Standard Oil operated a vast intelligence network. Company agents monitored competitors' shipments, tracked their customers, and reported back to headquarters. When a rival refinery secured a promising contract, Standard could undercut them precisely because it knew exactly what they were charging. When an independent tried to enter a market, Standard agents already had detailed files on their financing, their costs, their vulnerabilities. This was not corporate competition as most Americans understood it. This was institutional control. The difference matters. The conventional explanation focuses on monopoly. Rockefeller cornered a market, extracted monopoly profits, and enriched himself. Standard Oil was eventually broken up, the system corrected itself, and competition returned. This is the civics textbook version, but it misses the deeper architecture. What Rockefeller built was not merely a monopoly on oil. It was a system for converting industrial dominance into institutional permanence. The mechanism had 3 parts: vertical integration, horizontal combination, and philanthropic leverage. Each reinforced the others. Each extended the family's influence beyond any single industry. Vertical integration meant controlling every stage of production. Standard Oil did not just refine petroleum. It owned the pipelines that transported crude. It manufactured the barrels that held kerosene. It operated the tank cars that moved product by rail. It owned the warehouses where inventory was stored. Every step, from wellhead to lamp, represented a toll booth, and Standard Oil owned them all. By 1885, Standard Oil had assembled more than 300 separate companies under its control. It owned 20,000 oil wells, 4,000 miles of pipeline, 5,000 tank cars, and refineries in Cleveland, Philadelphia, New Jersey, and Baltimore. The company employed over 100,000 workers. Its annual revenues exceeded $50 million, at a time when the entire federal budget was roughly $300 million. Think about what this meant for anyone who wanted to compete. A rival refiner did not simply need a refinery. They needed pipelines to transport crude, which Standard Oil controlled or could price out of business. They needed railroads to ship product, which gave Standard preferential rates. They needed barrel manufacturers, which Standard had absorbed or undercut. The barriers were not individual, but systemic. The moat was not around one company, but around an entire industrial process. Horizontal combination meant coordinating with supposed competitors. The trust structure allowed Standard Oil to manage competing companies as a single entity while maintaining legal separation. When state legislatures began challenging the trust, Standard Oil reorganized as a holding company under New Jersey's permissive corporate laws. The form changed, the control remained. This was not new. The same pattern had appeared in railroads during the 1860s, when Jay Gould and Cornelius Vanderbilt fought for control of the Erie Railroad through stock manipulation and coordinated rate agreements. The same pattern would appear again in steel when J.P. Morgan assembled U.S. Steel in 1901 by combining Andrew Carnegie's mills with a dozen competitors. Rockefeller did not invent combination. He perfected it. But philanthropic leverage was Rockefeller's distinctive contribution, and it would prove more durable than the oil monopoly itself. In 1901, Rockefeller established the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research in New York. It was the first institution of its kind in America, a pure research laboratory modeled on Europe's great scientific institutes, where scientists could pursue basic research without teaching obligations. The initial endowment was $200,000. By 1920, Rockefeller had given over $50 million to the institute. Today, as Rockefeller University, it has produced 26 Nobel laureates. The following year, in 1902, Rockefeller created the General Education Board with an initial gift of $1 million, eventually growing to $129 million in total contributions. The board's stated mission was to promote education throughout the United States, without distinction of race, sex, or creed. Its actual effect was to reshape American education according to a particular vision. Frederick T. Gates, Rockefeller's chief philanthropic advisor, wrote in the board's 1904 occasional paper what became known as the Country's School of Tomorrow letter. The passage is revealing. In our dream, we have limitless resources, and the people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hand. Gates envisioned a system of practical education for the masses, training workers for industrial efficiency, while true intellectual education remained available to a select few. The General Education Board distributed its funds strategically. It supported teacher training programs, standardized curricula, and administrative reforms that transformed scattered local schools into a coordinated system. It funded professional education for a new class of school administrators. It promoted efficiency, measurement, and standardized testing. The board did not directly control schools. It shaped the professionals who ran them. Consider the medical profession. In 1910, educator Abraham Flexner, funded by the Carnegie Foundation, but with strong support from the General Education Board, published the Flexner Report. It surveyed 155 medical schools in the United States and Canada, rating their quality. Flexner recommended that most be closed. Over the following decade, more than half of American medical schools shut their doors. The survivors, Johns Hopkins, Harvard, Columbia, the University of Pennsylvania, received massive Rockefeller funding and became the models for modern medical education. Was the Flexner Report wrong? By contemporary standards, many medical schools were genuinely inadequate. They lacked laboratories, clinical training, and qualified faculty. The reforms produced better trained physicians and more rigorous standards. But the reforms also consolidated control. Before Flexner, medical education was diverse, decentralized, and accessible. After Flexner, it was standardized, expensive, and gate-kept by a small number of elite institutions, many of them dependent on Rockefeller money. The same pattern operated in public health. The Rockefeller Sanitary Commission, established in 1909, led the campaign to eradicate hookworm in the American South. The disease afflicted millions, causing chronic fatigue that was often misattributed to laziness or moral failing. The Commission's work was genuine and effective. Hookworm rates plummeted. But the campaign also built relationships between Rockefeller philanthropy and state health departments across the South. It created a model for public health intervention that relied on private philanthropy working through government institutions. The pattern established during hookworm eradication would shape American public health for a century. In 1913, Rockefeller assembled these scattered philanthropic efforts into a single entity, the Rockefeller Foundation. The initial endowment was approximately $100 million, equivalent to over $3 billion today. The foundation's charter was breathtaking in scope: to promote the well-being of mankind throughout the world. Let that sink in. A single family, whose fortune derived from controlling oil markets, now commanded an institution explicitly designed to shape human welfare globally. The foundation would fund medical research, agricultural development, social science, and international relations. It would operate in every continent. Its programs would train the scientists, administrators, and policy experts who staffed governments, universities, and international organizations worldwide. And here is what really reveals the scope of the system. The Rockefeller Foundation did not merely give money. It shaped fields. It determined what questions were legitimate to ask, what methods were acceptable for answering them, and what institutions would house the inquiry. It created the infrastructure through which knowledge was produced and disseminated. The Foundation's General Education Board transformed American universities. Between 1902 and 1960, the board distributed over $325 million to institutions of higher learning. The University of Chicago alone received over $35 million and was essentially a Rockefeller creation, founded in 1892 with the family's money and guided by their vision. Columbia, Harvard, Yale, and dozens of smaller institutions shaped their programs around Rockefeller funding priorities. But the real power lay not in donations, but in definitions. When the foundation funded social science research, it favored quantitative methods, empirical investigation, and practical application. This shaped generations of social scientists trained at Rockefeller-funded institutions using Rockefeller-favored methods. When the foundation funded international relations programs, it created the Council on Foreign Relations, established in 1921, which would become the preeminent institution shaping American foreign policy thought for the next century. The system worked exactly as intended, not through direct control, but through institutional leverage. The family did not need to command specific outcomes. They had shaped the institutions that produced outcomes. Meanwhile, the original source of Rockefeller wealth faced its reckoning. On May 15, 1911, the Supreme Court ruled in Standard Oil Co. of New Jersey v. United States that the company was an illegal monopoly. Chief Justice Edward White ordered its dissolution into 34 separate companies. The conventional narrative treats this as the triumph of antitrust law. The monopoly was broken. Competition returned. The system worked. But this narrative misses the mathematical reality. When Standard Oil was dissolved, John D. Rockefeller owned approximately 25% of the trust's stock. After dissolution, he owned 25% of 34 separate companies. In the decade following the breakup, many of these companies, Standard Oil of New Jersey, later Exxon, Standard Oil of New York, later Mobil, Standard Oil of California, later Chevron, Standard Oil of Indiana, later Amoco, and others, became more valuable than the original trust. Competition, it turned out, was good for oil company stocks. Here are the numbers. In 1911, Rockefeller's fortune was estimated at $900 million. By 1913, it had grown to approximately $1 billion. The breakup did not diminish Rockefeller's wealth. It multiplied it. The parallel to other antitrust actions is striking. When AT&T was broken up in 1984, the baby bells collectively became worth more than the original company. When Microsoft faced antitrust action in 2001, the company avoided breakup but emerged stronger. The pattern suggests something uncomfortable. Antitrust enforcement, as practiced in America, often benefits the very entities it is supposed to constrain. And then it got worse. The oil companies spawned by Standard Oil's breakup did not remain separate. Over the following decades, they consolidated. Exxon merged with Mobil in 1999. Chevron absorbed Texaco in 2001. Marathon combined with Ashland. The 34 pieces became 6 mega companies, then 5. The dissolution was not permanent. It was a pause. By the 1920s, the Rockefeller family had diversified far beyond oil. David Rockefeller, grandson of John D. Sr., became chairman of Chase Manhattan Bank in 1969, making him one of the most powerful bankers in the world. Nelson Rockefeller served as governor of New York from 1959 to 1973, then as vice president under Gerald Ford. Winthrop Rockefeller became governor of Arkansas. The family had translated economic power into political power. The institutional architecture extended into foreign affairs. The Council on Foreign Relations, founded in 1921 with substantial Rockefeller support, became the central meeting ground for America's foreign policy establishment. Its membership reads like a roster of secretaries of state, national security advisors, and CIA directors. The Council does not make policy. It produces the people and ideas that make policy. Simultaneously, the Rockefeller Foundation expanded its international operations. The International Health Division, established in 1913, conducted disease eradication campaigns across Latin America, Asia, and Africa. The foundation funded the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, trained public health officials for colonial administrations, and established medical schools in China, Brazil, and elsewhere. By 1950, the foundation had spent over $94 million on international health programs alone. In agriculture, the foundation funded what became known as the Green Revolution. Beginning in the 1940s, foundation scientists developed high-yield wheat and rice varieties that dramatically increased food production in Mexico, India, and the Philippines. Norman Borlaug, the agronomist who led these efforts, won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1970. The Green Revolution is credited with saving hundreds of millions from famine. But here is where the pattern becomes most consequential. The Green Revolution's high-yield crops required intensive inputs: synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, irrigation, and farm machinery. Small farmers who could not afford these inputs were displaced. Agricultural systems that had operated for centuries were disrupted. The fossil fuel industry, including the descendants of Standard Oil, supplied the fertilizers and pesticides. The loans to purchase inputs came from banks like Chase Manhattan. The machinery came from equipment manufacturers. The beneficiaries of the Green Revolution included the corporations that supplied its requirements. This was not a conspiracy. It was a system. The Rockefeller Foundation genuinely wanted to reduce hunger. The scientists genuinely developed better crop varieties. The outcomes genuinely saved lives, and the institutional arrangement genuinely channeled benefits toward specific corporate interests. Multiple truths can coexist. The scale of Rockefeller institutional influence in the mid-20th century is staggering when you look at actual records. A 1975 Senate report titled The Rockefeller File documented family members sitting on the boards of dozens of major corporations, foundations, and cultural institutions. David Rockefeller alone served on the boards of Chase Manhattan, the Museum of Modern Art, the Council on Foreign Relations, Rockefeller University, and numerous other organizations. The family's direct financial holdings were estimated at $1.3 billion in 1974. Their influence through interlocking directorships and institutional positions was incalculable. Consider the physical landscape. Rockefeller Center, the massive complex of 19 commercial buildings in Midtown Manhattan, was developed by John D. Rockefeller Jr. during the Great Depression. It transformed New York's skyline and created a new model for urban commercial development. The land beneath the United Nations headquarters in New York was donated by the Rockefeller family, making them effectively the landlords of global governance. The family's Pocantico Hills estate in Westchester County encompasses over 3,400 acres, larger than many towns. From the perspective of an ordinary American in 1960, the Rockefeller influence was both everywhere and invisible. The gasoline in your car came from a Standard Oil descendant. The medicine your doctor prescribed was developed using techniques pioneered at Rockefeller-funded institutions. The curriculum your children studied bore the imprint of General Education Board reforms. The foreign policy your government pursued was shaped in Council on Foreign Relations meetings. The philanthropic model, private wealth devoted to public purposes, was the Rockefeller model, replicated by Carnegie, Ford, and Gates. If you were a young scientist in 1955, your career was shaped by Rockefeller architecture. The laboratories where you trained, the grants that funded your research, the journals that published your findings, the conferences where you presented, all operated within systems established or influenced by Rockefeller philanthropy. You did not need to know this. You did not need to agree with any particular Rockefeller position. You simply operated within institutions that bore their imprint. This is not failure or unfortunate coincidence. This was success. The family had accomplished what direct political power could not: permanent influence through institutional design. And then the system faced its crisis. In 1973, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries imposed an oil embargo on the United States in response to American support for Israel during the Yom Kippur War. Within months, oil prices quadrupled. Americans waited in lines for gasoline. The entire economy staggered. The energy crisis exposed something uncomfortable about American power. The nation that had pioneered the oil industry, that had built its prosperity on cheap gasoline and automobile culture, was now dependent on foreign suppliers. The Rockefeller oil companies, Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, had actually expanded their international operations for decades, partnering with Middle Eastern governments through arrangements like the Arabian American Oil Company. American consumers suffered from high prices. American oil companies recorded record profits. In 1974, Congress held hearings on the energy crisis. Nelson Rockefeller, then nominated for vice president, faced scrutiny about family oil holdings. His confirmation hearings revealed the extent of Rockefeller economic influence. direct stakes in Exxon, Mobil, Standard Oil of California, Standard Oil of Indiana, and Standard Oil of Ohio, plus enormous influence through Chase Manhattan's role as banker to the oil industry. The hearings asked whether one family's interests might conflict with national interests. The question went unanswered. Nelson Rockefeller was confirmed as vice president. The oil crisis eventually passed, but the crisis had revealed the continuing relevance of the century-old pattern. What was good for the Rockefeller companies was not necessarily good for the American consumer. The pattern continued into the 21st century. In 2007, ExxonMobil, the largest descendant of Standard Oil, recorded the highest profits of any corporation in American history, $40.6 billion in a single year. This surpassed the previous record, also held by ExxonMobil, set the prior year. Adjusting for inflation, the Rockefeller heirs were more profitable than John D. Sr. had ever been. But here is where the contemporary situation is actually more complex than the historical comparison. The 21st century Rockefeller institutions began breaking from their oil heritage. In 2008, the Rockefeller Family Fund divested from ExxonMobil, citing the company's funding of climate change denial. In 2016, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund announced it would divest from all fossil fuel holdings. This was remarkable. The family that built its fortune on oil was now using its institutional power to challenge the oil industry. The philanthropic architecture that John D. Rockefeller created was being turned against the corporate architecture he had also created. It was as if the system had developed a conscience, or at least a strategic disagreement about the future. ExxonMobil responded by commissioning investigations into the Rockefeller Family Fund. The company alleged that the fund was coordinating with activist groups to damage ExxonMobil through legal and reputational campaigns. This much was documented. The Rockefeller Foundations had indeed funded environmental organizations, legal efforts, and journalistic investigations into ExxonMobil's climate activities. The family was using philanthropic leverage against its own corporate legacy. The same pattern of institutional influence, operating in a different direction. The mechanism had not changed, only the intent. So let us connect all the pieces. In 1870, a young bookkeeper from Cleveland incorporated a company to bring order to the chaotic oil industry. Through vertical integration, horizontal combination, and relentless efficiency, he built the largest corporation America had ever seen. He controlled not just an industry, but the infrastructure that industry required to function. When the government broke up Standard Oil, the family's wealth actually increased. The pieces were worth more than the whole. And those pieces eventually reconsolidated into modern giants like ExxonMobil and Chevron. But the Rockefeller ambition extended beyond oil. Beginning in 1901, the family systematically built a parallel structure, philanthropic institutions designed to shape education, medicine, science, and public policy. The Rockefeller Foundation, the General Education Board, the Council on Foreign Relations, Rockefeller University. These institutions did not control outcomes directly. They shaped the people, methods, and frameworks through which outcomes were produced. A young scientist in 1940 did not think of herself as operating within a Rockefeller system. She simply trained at a Rockefeller-funded university, applied for Rockefeller-funded grants, published in Rockefeller-influenced journals, and attended Rockefeller-supported conferences. The system was invisible because it was comprehensive. The fish does not notice the water. Today, the Rockefeller name carries less daily recognition. The fortune, dispersed among hundreds of descendants, no longer concentrates power as it did when John D. Sr. held a quarter of Standard Oil. The institutions, the university, the foundation, the council, continue to operate, but among many similar institutions. Yet the pattern established by Rockefeller philanthropy shapes American life in ways most citizens never consider. The model of the private foundation, converting taxable wealth into tax-exempt influence, was pioneered by the Rockefellers and replicated by Ford, Carnegie, Gates, Buffett, and thousands of others. The total assets of American private foundations now exceed $1 trillion. This is wealth that might otherwise have been taxed. It is instead deployed according to the priorities of wealthy individuals and their chosen trustees. The question this raises is uncomfortable. When private wealth shapes public institutions, universities, hospitals, research laboratories, policy organizations, who decides the public interest? The Rockefellers genuinely believed they were serving humanity. The hookworm campaigns, the Green Revolution, the medical research, these produced real benefits. But they also produced a model in which private judgment substitutes for democratic deliberation. Here is what has changed and what has not. John D. Rockefeller could sit in his office at 26 Broadway and directly control 90% of American oil refining. No individual today commands that concentration of power. ExxonMobil, the largest Rockefeller descendant, controls perhaps 3% of global oil production. The industry has become global, competitive, and diffuse. But the institutional model Rockefeller pioneered operates more broadly than ever. Private foundations shape education, health policy, environmental priorities, and global development. Their combined influence may exceed what Standard Oil ever commanded, but it is distributed among thousands of actors pursuing thousands of agendas. The mechanism Rockefeller invented has been democratized, or at least made available to everyone who accumulates sufficient wealth. The pattern says something important about American power. Economic concentration creates opportunities for institutional influence. Philanthropy provides the vehicle for translating wealth into permanent infrastructure. And that infrastructure shapes the frameworks through which Americans understand their world. We are not living in a world shaped simply by market competition and democratic choice. We are living in a world shaped by institutions, universities, foundations, think tanks, medical schools, that bear the fingerprints of decisions made in Rockefeller boardrooms a century ago. The Standard Oil monopoly was broken. The institutional architecture endures. Those who control the institutions through which knowledge is produced need not control specific outcomes. They need only shape the frameworks within which outcomes become thinkable. And that power, the power to define the possible, is the most durable power of all.